Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about technical transcendence and systems thinking and how that can be applied to the spiritual existence. And this is something that I know isn't widely talked about. It's not a common mode or of communication or conveying a point, but I think it's a severe lack in terms of the rational mind really integrating this intuitive understanding and how we can systemize and reason from first principles these more holistic, intuitive components to life and the complexity. And so, this is a framework that will help you. This is wisdom compiled in a relational format with reason and hopefully integrated this sort of eastern western divide. And yeah, that is that. So we're going to jump into the first component of this, which is how you would maximize the sort of positive aspects of ourselves and what these aspects really emerge from and what they boil down to. So we will start with the quotient view for consciousness. And consciousness may be something you aren't familiar with. And if you aren't, I would highly recommend starting at Power vs. Force by David R. Hawkins. And what he introduced is a elegant scale of consciousness. And it's coherent, it's useful, and true. So what you need to know if you're not familiar is above the level of 200 is something that makes you strong or is life affirming, and below the level of 200 will make you weak or is not life affirming, so not true. And as we evolve in our life, in how we grow and change and transform in our life, we go through blockades in this scale. We struggle to break certain barriers. We may suffer with lower vibrations or things we can't handle at the time, and how we process and move through them is how we go up on this scale. And you may not resonate with all of this right now, but if we just focus in on the two left hand columns, you'll see that these are things that you can quite easily sort of verify for yourself. Am I living a courageous life? Am I feeling in neutrality? So these correlate to feelings, but are more about the context within which you exist. And this is, if you're stuck in a world or a worldview and a self view where you're angry, this is something that ends up creating like a self-sabotaging state and personality and environment and situations. So you end up creating your reality from this context of consciousness. And yeah, if you do want to dive deeper into that, I have other videos. But for now, we're just going to understand that this does exist, and we're going to be fundamentally expanding on this just for this first maximizing view. So understanding that this is the context, this is where everything sort of lives within. It's the context where all the content resides. So what this relationship is mapping is the emergence from consciousness. So from consciousness, we have a certain level of agency. And I'm using the word quotient here just to define that it's on a scale. It's on low, medium, high, if you will. And so if you are high on the level of consciousness, if you're at 540 LOC, so level of consciousness, then that would correlate to something like love. And that would show up or emerge in these other positive attributes of your life. And you could be struggling in one of these areas. You could not be fulfilling your potential in one of these areas, and this will correlate to a block or something that is getting in the way of you becoming this most positive version of yourself. So you could think of this as like an optimization problem where you're trying to optimize for consciousness, and then there's so many variables to consider, but these are the positive ones where if you are highly responsible, you're taking responsibility for your life, you're really showing up in all the ways that benefit you and humanity and your spiritual existence, then that would then correlate with your agency and how you really take ownership and direct your life and start taking action towards the things that matter and how you prioritize that. And I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can start to see how from agency, awareness, vitality, intellect, we have some pretty fundamental components that we have a level of awareness, we have a level of agency or willpower that we're able to direct and, move in this world. We have this dynamic sense of singularity where we're able to make decisions and we're able to self-assess with this awareness. And we have this vitality, we have this body, we have this energy to use and utilize. And these are all things that can be maximized. We have a mind, we have a certain level of intelligence and faculties, where faculties are more these lower down aspects, these more emergent, where you could have your mindfulness, so your ability to remain in the present moment, your ability to focus, your ability to, lock in and go deep on a particular problem, or have a creative flow state and things like that. You then have your strength, and this is more than just physical strength. This can be, emotional, mental, sort of resilience. And then you have your skills, your skill sets, your competence in certain areas and avenues of life. And these are all tools, really. They're all tools to enhance a level of consciousness, to grow and to almost embody intimately. So if we're constantly learning, we have a growth mindset, if you will, then at the same time you have to learn to be grateful and not take those things for granted, and have faith that things are going to work out, and have a strong intention for your vision and where you want to go. And this relationship may not seem clear, but if you just focus on these tools and maybe some resonate more strongly with your strengths or weaknesses, then that would be the place to pay attention. And almost knowing that focusing on the most fundamental, the consciousness quotient or the level of consciousness, then this is a proxy that everything else is going up. This is, like I said, the floor almost that is bringing all of these up. And so as you become more loving, for example, you may notice that you have more energy, you're more vital, you have heightened awareness, you're seeing things maybe that you were missing before. You have more agency, you're able to take more decisive action, you're able to inhibit inhibitions, basically, your desires and things that may be dancing at you for your attention. You're able to say no and yes to certain things that you really want out of this life. And I hope that relationship is really stated here, with this being at the center, that the way that you are in your being fundamentally like emerges into your doing, and we'll get more into that as we move down this framework. But that is the positive or the quotient view, and that leads us into the negative. So, there wouldn't be light without dark. There, at the same time, there is things we're optimizing and maximizing. There are also things we want to minimize and to reduce. And this doesn't mean they're inherently bad, but towards our goal of growing and evolving and living a good life and living a life of fulfillment and purpose, all these metaphysical or philosophical concepts, then there's also a certain amount of work where we're identifying these negative aspects to ourselves and moving past them, moving through them. So, what are these, more simply, 4 things that we end up minimizing, undoing? And you may already be wondering that these obviously correlate to the positive aspects. If you have lots of negativity, it's hard to be positive. This is almost weighing you down when you're leveling up all these positive faculties, but at a certain point, if you don't cut the negative loose, then you're not going to get any higher. You're not going to grow anymore. You're not going to actualize on that potential. And yeah, this is where these come in. So I'm going to explain constriction, or your ability to not be open to life. You're resisting your calling, maybe, or you don't really acknowledge a part of yourself that wants to be expressed. You're somehow constricted, and this is obviously the feeling that I have. It's a level of, I don't want to do that, but it may be subconscious, or it's like, I'm not going to do that now, or this isn't me. It's like you're not accepting some aspect of reality that is true, and so you're constricted, and this will drain your energy. This will manifest in all sorts of ways, but the fundamental component here is that you have a level of constriction in the same way you have a level of consciousness, and that's why we're using this quotient word and this quotient view. You have a level of constriction. And just as to make it more simple or to help in the understanding, it's how you would stop being constricted towards life. So you stop resisting it. I hope that makes sense. And then we have the limits in our lives, the imaginary walls that we put in place that end up holding us back or saying we can't do something. And these are beliefs, these are things that we believe to be true, but are in fact not. They're true only in the sense that they're self-fulfilling prophecies. And once you have a belief that is limiting you, it's only limiting you because you choose to believe it. And then when you believe it, it's true. And so there's this sort of recursive pattern of, oh, okay, it's true because I've made it true to some extent. And once you see that for what it is, then that's often the undoing of these limiting beliefs. So they can only limit you as much as they're unconscious. But as soon as you shine light on them, you shine light on this negativity that's holding you back, then these limits evaporate and they go away. And I think it's important to talk about the cravings and aversions aspect. So all of these at their core are fundamentally a desire or a craving or an aversion or a fear. So you're striving for something and you're not happy with that fact, or you're fearful of something, you're resisting it. And that could be how we start to identify these things within our own life. And almost the first step is identification, is being aware, being self-aware, knowing thyself. Because once you see them for what they are, you can do the work to undo. And then we have the distortion quotient, which doesn't mean anything yet, but the distortion is applied onto our perceptions. And when you perceive reality in a distorted way, you can imagine you have lenses that are coloring the world in a particular light or judgment, that once you start undoing these, you actually have more clarity. You can see things, people, systems for what they are. You're not distorting reality. You're not reacting to things that are not as you are perceiving them. And fundamentally, the three we've talked about and the fourth we're going to are all mechanisms of the inverse of these is effectively how we can heighten our consciousness. So we become less constricted, we become less limited, we become less distorted in our reality, become less tense, and we'll get onto that. And these are all modes or mechanisms. So this is really the physics of consciousness evolution and how we do evolve and how we do change. And people may use different terminology and different words and different understanding, but they don't really. The problem is if you don't look at it from like a holistic point of view, or if you don't try and think from first principles or the systems thinking, you end up missing substantial parts. So I think that's where this next one comes in, because tension is something that is incredibly important to consider, but it's often misconstrued as the entire process, or which I think the tendency is that because if you store tension in your body and you release that, it's a very intimate experience. It can be energy or somatic release, and people do things like breath work and sound therapy, all these things to release tension, or even yoga. And people then say this is the only process. This is the only process for evolving in your life or getting out of your own way. And that's obviously not true. As we've discussed, there is being open and unconstricted. There is, clarity and not distorting your reality. There is not believing in things that you've told yourself or your experience has told you, that are programs. And again, so reduce tension in the body, stored emotion. So it's important to consider that these are from fundamentally things that are holding you back. They're getting in the way of you maximizing. They're the weights on this balloon that is trying to float up. It's just an analogy, but if that doesn't make sense, I'm going to talk a lot more about this framework and how you can operate with it. And once you start identifying these things in your life, you start paying attention, you move through them and sort of accept and not demonize them, and all these sort of subtle things that are traps on the path to undoing these things, unlearning, if you will. So just for these two, I'm going to introduce just the abstract representation so you can abstract away into a more useful model. But you have this where the consciousness intersects, you have sort of these more emergent properties sort of expanding out as that. And you have this box of negativity. So you have this red box that you're trying to reduce and reduce and reduce and reduce. And that is the idea. And sort of the summation of this, or the next emergent layer of this. You can see how we sort of reasoned through this, and now the combination and how this emerges in your life is the more integration of subjective and objective reality. So how we flow with life. And so this is less about maximizing, it's less about minimizing, which are very quotient or numerical specific mentalities. This is about going with the evolution and the change and the chaos and the order, and sort of finding that balance. So again, these are now more, well, entirely different concepts, and I know you can't see this, but that's actually for later. So let's get rid of that. So we have purpose, identity, traits, and states. Let's add an S to these. There you go. So purpose, or your meaning in your life, and the things that give you a sense of significance and drive, these are things that obviously you're going to heavily identify with, and that's where these relationships live. And if you analyze your identity, you're going to come into your traits and your personality, and how your subjective way of being in the world sort of really affects your reality and impacts. And then you'll notice that this also impacts your states. So the way you're showing up, the mentality you have, is also impacting your mental and physical, emotional states. And the process from going, almost tracing back, this is one that I filled out, so this is just an example. But if you trace back from work, love, and energy, these are sort of three fundamental aspects to life. On like a very high level, you can partition life in lots of different ways, but if you think about how you're showing up in your work, your energy, your love or relationships. And for me, I had sort of three sub identities or personas or archetypes, whatever the word that you would use. And then that then goes into what I would, or how I see myself showing up, and ideally showing up. And just for example, you see, I see myself as an athlete. I'm strengthening, I'm performing, I'm restoring in terms of all of those things. I'm a friend, so I choose to inspire, encourage, help, hear, connect. All these things that I deem to be sort of my current state. This may change, this may evolve, this may be wrong, but this is an exercise that I did, and I'd highly recommend you do it, is you go through each of these three and really reflect on the identities you're showing up with, and how you want to do those identities, how you want to show up for those roles and responsibilities. And yeah, that is the first exercise, because I think as we go into these more emergent levels, things become more practical. Things become more like, oh, okay, there's practices that I can do to shift my states. There's, mindset work that I can do to change my traits and my personality. I can discover my purpose by really diving into who I am and introspecting. And that's what this exercise is. Same with identity, sort of two sides of the same coin. And also on a not so positive side, where you identify these negative states, negative traits, maybe a lack of purpose or unhealthy identities, where you then would echo back into the minimization. And so that would take you back into this frame of, okay, am I constricting to something? Am I limiting? Am I tense? Am I distorting? And it's obviously may not be obvious. Well, it may not be initially obvious until it is, but I think you can trace back from negative arisings here in life and trace back into this sort of minimization framework. And yeah, that is that. So now that we've sort of integrated those two frames, then you go into the more creative aspect. And for this to happen, you really need to integrate. You need to become coherent. And what that means is you're doing the work to minimize, but you're doing it in a way that is actionable, it's practical, and you have ways of affirming your being. And so this is the first one. So as these sort of emerge from your being, these relate highly to your traits. It's nothing to do with what you're doing. This is how you feel and how you perceive yourself and how you currently understand reality. And so you may find yourself trying to tune into these more, what would you call them? Spiritual aspects of reality. So we have intentions and virtues, and you can ask yourself if they're true, and you can repeat them if that helps you. And so you can affirm that you're growing into these aspects of yourself. If it's applicable, if it's something you think will help in the minimization, and if you think it's where you need that extra work, like oftentimes you may look at these and be like, yeah, I'm clearly not being grateful enough. I'm looking for more gratitude in my life, and that's something that I'm willing to invest in the short term. I want to affirm this aspect of myself and really, see it flourish. I want to see it grow. I want to practice gratitude, and you will practice gratitude if that's what you want. And once you integrate a level of gratitude, then you're able to express that outward. And so this integrate is you become more, or your being shifts and you transform. Then you're able to shine that outward, and you're able to create a world or a reality around you that encompasses gratitude, is already by like default, grateful. And that may not seem totally intuitive now, but once you embody a level of, for example, here, creativity, you end up being more creative. And what does that mean? So if you really tune into creativity as, say, a frequency, then you show up creating more. You show up in your doing, but from your being. And that's the general principle here that we're trying to convey. So this is more just some meditations, so I don't think I'm going to go into too much detail on these, but we have self-purification, self-observation, self-actualization, and self-realization. So these are the frames that you're going in with when you're meditating, and how that shifts your being, and how that creates a level of centeredness. And so I like to view meditation in a sort of coming to your center and coming to your peace. And so this fundamental belief is that at your core is a level of peace or stillness or awareness. And that path may require a commitment to purification, a commitment to actualizing, a commitment to self-realization, really knowing who it is you are, or a commitment to observation, self-observation in this case. And I think depending on where you're at, again, this is often missed. Often people just say, self-observation is all you need, and that's what's worked for me, and that should be applied to everyone. And that's not the case, because depending on where you're at, one of these four will be what is required. And we're almost at the end now, but number 3, so this is evaluating your life and understanding where there may be issues just based on the emergence of what's happening. And so this is very, material. This is very what's happening outside of me, what's going on in my life. This is documenting the activities and your health in some regards, and your relationships, your financial abundance, your creation, your expression, your learning, your serendipity, or how much synchronicities you're experiencing, your peace, like we just mentioned, your equanimity, your flow states, your focus, which we've discussed. And so, again, these are meant to bring you into some level of awareness as where you maybe need to do work. It's simply, I have lessons to learn in this area here. Health is a more complicated one because it breaks down further into, many more aspects: sleep, strength, mood. And this is just the framework that makes most coherent sense, and, to me. And that's why I'm sharing it. This is sort of my theory of everything in terms of systems thinking and how we apply this to ourselves and how we end up growing, changing. And the last one here, number 4, is harmony or energizing. Because once you're in balance, you're in harmony, then you have more energy. You have more energy to utilize. You're wasting a lot less. You're almost more efficient as a configuration, if you will. And so these poles that you're trying to balance are, you may be familiar with the 6 needs and how these balance. And so you have certainty and how you need certainty in your life. Otherwise, you will feel sort of in disarray, and you need variety. And if you have too much of this order or chaos, then you're not in the sort of optimal growth potential. Same thing with significance and connection. So the connection to others, or how respected, so the sort of respect and love balance. And if you become too egotistical and significant in your endeavors, then you maybe lose your touch on humanity and connection, and that can be an imbalance that is difficult to find when you're over investing on one or the other, the sort of the social or the overly practical or egotistical. But yeah, it's a fine balance, and it's these things that you'll notice when you're lacking. You'll be able to, do I have enough connection in my life? Do I have enough significance? Do I have enough, on to the next one, growth or contribution? So am I growing? Am I growing enough? Am I contributing enough? And I think once you have this framework installed in your mind, then you're able to quickly notice more subtle changes, more subtle things that are happening where maybe you need to invest in one area, or you feel like you're unsatisfied or out of balance in some ways. And yeah, that is, I guess, another reflective exercise, but this becomes a level of mindfulness when you're bringing it to your everyday, when you're helping other people. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So just to summarize this, integrate to create, it's going inward, assessing the outside, and showing up with all the tools and the mindfulness and awareness, and really, if you affirm all of this, then you are going to break through those limits and you are going to become greater than what you currently are. If you meditate on what's important for you to work on, then you're going to find your peace. You're going to have a sense of well-being and integrity with your being. And if you evaluate where you're at and you're honest with yourself, you'll be able to easily see where you need to pivot and where things need work. And if you focus on the poles, you focus on these things to balance, then life doesn't need to be hard. You're satisfied, you're in harmony, you feel like you're getting everything out of life that you ever wanted. And that's what's possible, but no one teaches you this stuff, maybe until now. And a lot of the wisdom is scattered. It's all over the place. And this is why so many people are on this journey of seeking truth and discovery. And it's our job to really put it into a level of coherence and frameworks for people to not have to, really, really struggling to work on themselves and to grow. This stuff should be easy. This stuff should be systemized. Don't know why it isn't, but I'm definitely inspired to work on this. And if you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed these sort of frameworks and you want to know more, you want to know deeper, you want to understand the intimate nuances and subtleties and how this all really came about from my personal experience, and how you don't discover this all at once. This is an iterative process. This is something that when you're really applying yourself, and I naturally have a sort of systems thinking, first principles mind, I need to know how this stuff works. I need to know the nuance and the intricacies and the mechanisms. Otherwise, we're not doing efficient action. We're sporadic in our efforts. And so this philosophizing or modeling, however you see what this is a tool. This is an abstraction on truth that should be useful and is useful for me. And that's why I'm sharing it. So again, if you want to know more, reach out. We've got minmaxflow.com, True Coherence coming soon. But yeah, hit me up. All right, cheers guys. Bye.